My name is Claire Weston. I'm 58 years old, and I'm standing beside my husband of 34 years at the front of a ballroom filled with his colleagues, old friends, and family. There's jazz humming in the background, champagne bubbling in every hand, and fake laughter echoing off the walls. This is supposed to be his big night. But right now, every eye is on me. He taps the mic again. You know, he chuckles, motioning toward me with a smug grin. Claire never really understood my work. But she was always good at keeping the house clean and the casseroles warm. That line burned. Not because it was shocking, but because it was expected. That's the role I've played for decades. And if you've ever stood in a room full of people while someone who once swore to love you made a joke out of your life, then you understand. Let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Because the silent ones, we remember everything. Laughter erupts, some polite, some pitying. My face stays still. My palms don't. He keeps going. Honestly, I think I'd have lost my mind if I had to sit at home doing nothing all day like she did. I mean, raising kids and painting birds or whatever you do doesn't compare to running a company with 300 employees, right? The crowd shifts, nervous chuckles now. My throat tightens, but not from shame, from clarity. I look at him, this man, the same man who used to hold my hand during chemo, the same man who cried when our daughter was born. Somewhere between those days and now, he started believing his story alone was worth telling. But what he doesn't know is, tonight, so is mine. So I take the mic. You know, I was going to keep it sweet, I say gently, my voice cutting through the hum like glass. Say a few nice things, sit back, be the silent wife, but I think after 34 years I've earned 5 honest minutes. Wouldn't you all agree? The room stills. You could hear a pin drop over the sound of his ego deflating. Before I show you exactly what I said that shattered him in front of everyone who ever mattered to him, let's rewind. Because this didn't start here. It started last spring, with a forgotten anniversary and a bottle of Pinot. He came home late. No explanation, no apology. Just his briefcase, his loosened tie, and that scent of a woman's perfume he thought I'd be too tired to notice. I didn't say anything. Not that night. Not the next. Instead, I found my old sketchbooks, the ones I tucked away after our second child was born. The ones he used to say were cute, but not real work. I enrolled in an online art business course. I started selling my paintings anonymously under a brand name he'd never connect to me. 3 months later, I had a waiting list of clients, a studio in town, and money flowing into a bank account he didn't even know existed. That's when I began documenting everything, not just my business, but him. The late-night calls, the passive digs, the vacations he suddenly had to reschedule for work. I wasn't planning revenge back then. Not yet. I just wanted to see clearly. Because when someone gaslights you long enough, you start believing their version of your life. And his version always made me small. You're too sensitive. You don't get how the world works. You should be grateful. That word, grateful, stuck to me like cheap cologne, as if I hadn't given up my 20s and 30s to build a life that revolved around his. But the final straw came 2 months ago. His assistant, a bright-eyed 27-year-old named Cassidy, posted a photo of them on a work trip. It wasn't just the way she leaned into him. It was the caption, "To the man who inspires me daily." I knew then. The affair wasn't new. But my silence? That was about to expire. And the best part? I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to beg. I just needed a microphone and a room full of people who thought they knew who he was. And I had both. So now, standing in the soft glow of chandeliers, with half of the city's corporate elite waiting for my next word, I breathe in slowly. He's about to meet a version of me he never believed could exist. The version he helped create. And what I say next will be the last thing he ever expected. There's a rhythm to my mornings. I wake before the sun, when the house is still and forgiving. Coffee. Silence. A little light stretching before the world remembers I exist. The same wooden floors I've walked for decades creak beneath me like old bones. Familiar, dependable, slightly worn, like me. For years, I built my world in the margins. While Daniel ran board meetings and closed million-dollar deals, I ran a household that never dropped a beat. 2 kids, 3 moves, 6 Christmases hosted without a single complaint. I made it all look easy. And that was my mistake. Because when you do something well enough for long enough, people stop noticing. I didn't want much. Not jewelry, not getaways, not recognition in front of strangers. Just appreciation. A quiet thank you. A pause before a sarcastic comment. A glance that still saw me as something more than a fixture in his shadow. But those moments came less and less. Take our last vacation, for instance. Tuscany. A dream I'd waited 20 years for. I had this image in my head of slow walks through vineyards, laughter over pasta, him sketching me while I painted the hills. But it wasn't like that. He spent most days on his laptop, glued to Zoom meetings. I wandered Florence alone, pretending I didn't mind. At dinner one night, I tried to share something. A silly idea for a children's book I'd been toying with. He barely looked up from his wine. "You're sweet, Claire," he said. "But you've always had your head in the clouds." It was meant as a compliment, I think. But it landed like a brick. That's how most of his words came lately, dressed in charm but heavy with dismissal. And yet I stayed soft. I still made his coffee just the way he liked it. Still ironed the sleeves of his favorite shirts because I knew he hated creases. Still kept a bottle of the Pinot he liked on hand, even if I preferred Cabernet. Not because I was spineless, but because I believed that love, real love, means showing up even when it isn't flashy or reciprocated. But love, I've learned, is not martyrdom. The signs were there long before the party. Like the night he came home late, reeking of some citrusy perfume and full of vague stories about a client dinner. He kissed me on the cheek and said, "You're amazing for trusting me. Most women would be insecure." I smiled and nodded, but that word, insecure, clung to me for days, as if I was flawed for wanting honesty, as if my quiet was weakness. And yet, in the silence, I held strength. I raised 2 children who still call me just to hear my voice. I nursed his mother through her final days, even when she barely remembered my name. I volunteered at the local shelter every Thursday, taught painting classes at the community center on Saturdays. My world was not flashy, but it was full. He just never looked closely enough to see it. One night, I asked him, gently, if he was happy. He laughed like I'd told a joke. "Claire, don't get dramatic. You always do this when you feel bored. Take a class or something." I nodded, and I did. That week, I signed up for a business course in secret. It was nothing glamorous, just an online training on how to start an art studio. But every module felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd shelved long ago. I'd forgotten what it was like to learn for me. Not for the kids. Not for him. The more I worked, the more alive I felt. While he scrolled through his phone at night, I drafted business plans. While he traveled for work, I met with potential clients over tea. While he mocked TikTok, I went viral on it, anonymously. My art, my hands, my name, finally mine again. But I still said nothing, because I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to remember who I was. And yet, even in those quiet wins, the slights continued. He once told a friend while I stood 3 feet away, "Claire's lucky. She doesn't have to stress over work. Must be nice to have hobbies instead of responsibilities." They laughed. I smiled. Later that night, he asked me if I was upset. I said, "No, just tired." And I was. Tired of making myself smaller so he could feel big. Tired of pretending that crumbs were feasts. Tired of waiting for permission to bloom. I never told anyone. Not our kids, not my sister, not even my best friend. Because when you've spent a lifetime being quiet, speaking up feels like breaking glass. But slowly, I stopped seeking his applause. I started painting larger canvases, raised my prices, built a website, hired an assistant. My work was in galleries before he ever noticed I wasn't home on Tuesday nights. And when he finally asked, "Where do you go so much lately?" I just smiled and said, "Out." He didn't press, because to press would be to care, and he'd stopped doing that a long time ago. So I built in silence. I grew in shadows, until my world had its own sun. All he saw was the version of me that served his narrative, the one who stayed small, laughed politely, and filled the empty spaces he didn't know how to. But that version was gone. What remained was someone steady, someone rooted, someone ready. And when the invitation for his retirement party arrived, embossed, excessive, and addressed only to Mr. Daniel Weston, I circled the date. Not in spite, but in clarity. Because I knew something he didn't. This party wasn't going to be the tribute he expected. It was going to be the stage I never asked for, and finally claimed. It was a Friday evening, one of those early spring nights when the air still held a chill, but the promise of warmth lingered just beneath it. Daniel had invited me to join him at the golf club for a mixer. He said it was just some networking, nothing fancy, but I knew better. The guest list included half the board of his company, several city officials, and that nauseating handful of power couples who all laughed the same way and traded spouses like cufflinks. I didn't want to go. I had a gallery opening that weekend, my gallery opening, but he guilted me into attending. "Come on, Claire," he said, buttoning his shirt in the mirror. "It's important you're seen. It reflects well on me when you're there." That sentence didn't sit right. It reflects well on me. Not I want you there. Not you'd enjoy it. I should have said no. But I didn't. I put on a soft gray dress and low heels. Something understated. Elegant. Forgettable. The way he liked me. When we arrived, the room was already buzzing. Laughter wrapped itself around martini glasses, and Daniel instantly morphed into the man I recognized from magazine interviews. Charming, polished, inflated. He slid through the crowd like a knife through butter, tossing smiles and handshakes like confetti. I trailed behind, the accessory wife. The first slap came subtly. He introduced me to a new board member. "This is Claire. She keeps the garden alive and the wine stocked." A pause. "Also my wife." Laughter. I smiled. Inside, something flinched. Later, we were standing with a cluster of executives and their wives, and Daniel was holding court again. Stories about building the company from scratch, about leadership, about sacrifice. "You wouldn't believe how many nights I slept at the office," he said, swirling his scotch. "Claire didn't love it, but she got used to it. She always knew the bigger picture was mine to carry." He turned to me, touched my shoulder. "She's my constant, my anchor. Always there when I get home, reliable." There it was again. Not loved, not admired, just useful. The conversation moved on, but I didn't, because I wasn't his anchor. I had spent the past year building a life without him, right under his nose, and the fact that he couldn't see it made the insult worse. Still, I swallowed it, until the final blow came, at dinner. Long white tables, candlelight, clinking silverware. I was seated between a woman named Darla, who only spoke about her Pilates instructor's abs, and Cassidy, his Cassidy, who looked at Daniel like he personally invented oxygen. She leaned toward me at one point and said with a smirk, "It's so amazing you and Daniel have lasted so long. You're like his safe space, you know? His comfort zone." Her words were laced with condescension, but also something else. Possession. Like she knew something I didn't. Or worse, something I already suspected. Then Daniel stood up to make a toast. Everyone quieted. He raised his glass and began with the usual cliches. Gratitude. Legacy. The next chapter. And then, "And of course," he said, gesturing toward me, "I couldn't have done it without my wife. She made it easy to come home, always had dinner ready, never asked too many questions." The crowd laughed. Not cruelly, just uncomfortably. He chuckled too, clearly enjoying himself. And honestly, she never got in the way of the real work. That's rare these days. I didn't hear the rest, because I was frozen, staring at this man I had loved, supported, stood by, as he reduced me to an obedient ghost in his success story. He didn't see me. He never had. And now he was mocking me in front of the very people he claimed to respect. I felt the heat rise in my chest. My face burned, but I refused to cry. Not there. Not in front of them. I felt Cassidy glance at me. I saw her shift slightly in her seat. She wasn't smug now. She was nervous. As if even she knew he'd gone too far. But Daniel, he kept smiling, kept drinking, kept owning the room like he owned me. That was the moment the betrayal crystallized. Not just the affair, not just the dismissal, but the truth of it all. He didn't just stop loving me. He never respected me. And worse, he thought I didn't have the power to do anything about it. When dinner ended, I slipped away to the bathroom. Not to cry, to breathe. I stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't fragile. She was tired. Tired of waiting for validation. Tired of making herself invisible so he could shine. Tired of dressing up humiliation in silk and small talk. And in that moment, something shifted. A thought as clear and sharp as glass. They messed with the wrong woman. Not in fury, not in chaos, but in certainty. The kind of certainty that moves quietly. I went home that night and pulled every file from my business account. Every painting sold, every receipt, every photo. I made a list of every board member he'd mentioned over the years. I made calls, sent samples, introduced myself, not as Daniel Weston's wife, as Claire Weston, founder and creative director of Weston Studios. Within 2 weeks, my work was commissioned for an installation in the same building Daniel's company was headquartered in. Within 4 weeks, a city councilwoman bought one of my pieces for her office and invited me, not him, to the unveiling. Within 6, I knew what I had to do. The retirement party had already been planned. A black tie affair at the same ballroom where we'd once celebrated his promotion. The guest list, his entire career, lined up in suits and evening gowns. I didn't need to ruin it. I just needed to reclaim it, to let them see what he never did. And so, with months of patience and years of swallowed pride stitched into my spine, I circled the date again. Not in anger, in purpose. Because when power slips into arrogance, it forgets one crucial thing. Silence is not surrender, it's strategy. And mine had run its course. I didn't confront him. That's the part that surprises people. There was no screaming match, no suitcase tossed on the lawn, no weepy late-night ultimatums. I let him keep his illusion. Let him believe I was still the quiet woman who folded his shirts just the way he liked and didn't ask questions when he came home late. I didn't change anything on the surface. But underneath, I was building a different world, one where he no longer had a say in the narrative. The morning after that dinner at the golf club, I started making moves. Small ones at first, untraceable, emotionally clean. I met with a lawyer, a woman named Deborah who specialized in asset protection and marital business law. I didn't bring divorce papers. I brought questions. She gave me answers, and then she gave me options. By the end of our 2-hour meeting, I had more control over my future than I'd ever thought possible. First, I opened a second LLC under my name, tied directly to Weston Studios, entirely separate from Daniel's financial reach. Second, I transferred all future art sales, licensing contracts, and commissions to that new entity, quietly, cleanly, legally. Third, I filed for copyright registration on my entire art portfolio, including pieces he'd once offhandedly claimed we owned together. He didn't notice. He was too busy planning his big send-off. Too busy polishing speeches and approving wine lists for a party he assumed I'd help coordinate. I smiled and offered input when asked, white orchids instead of red, duck instead of steak, and let him believe I was just along for the ride. That was the key, letting him think nothing had changed, but everything had. The more control I gained in the background, the lighter I felt. like I'd been living with weights tied to my ankles and hadn't noticed until they started to loosen. I took meetings with gallery owners under the guise of charity work. I hired a part-time publicist, not flashy, but sharp, to begin prepping me for a solo launch next season. I commissioned a rebrand, new logo, new website, new studio photos. And for the first time in my life, I paid for it all with my own income. Pure, unattached, undeniably mine. But what I didn't do was gloat. Not once. Because this wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about reclaiming. It was about becoming solid beneath the surface while he kept skating along the ice. And the cracks were starting to show. I noticed how his jokes were falling flatter at parties. How Cassidy began looking at her phone more than at him. How the board, once enamored with his every word, started calling his number 2 directly instead of going through him. He didn't notice. But I did. I watched the structure he built start to shift under him. And I didn't push. I just let gravity do what it always does. And still, he saw me the same way. When I mentioned a studio renovation, he replied, "You mean your hobby room?" When I got a local write-up in a design magazine, he skimmed it and said, "They'll put anyone in those things these days." When I dressed up for a solo event, he said, "Who are you trying to impress?" Each line rolled off my back like rain on glass. Because I knew something he didn't. I wasn't trying anymore. I was becoming. And when the official invitation for his retirement gala arrived, cream cardstock, gold foil, embossed with Daniel E. Weston, celebrating a legacy, I didn't flinch. I picked out a dress that didn't apologize for anything. Slate blue silk, minimal jewelry, red lips. Not too loud, but no longer invisible. I booked a hair appointment with the stylist he once said was too expensive for a housewife. And then, the week before the event, I finalized one last detail. The gift. I had commissioned a custom painting, a large abstract piece called Departure. Cool grays, deep shadows, hints of gold. It was beautiful. Haunting. A reflection of endings disguised as beginnings. On the back, a plaque. To Daniel. For the legacy you thought you owned. With all my silence, Claire, I had it professionally wrapped and scheduled for delivery to the ballroom the morning of the event. No sender name. Just a note for it to be unveiled during the final toast. I wasn't sure if he'd read the plaque before the crowd saw it. I wasn't even sure if he'd recognize the style as mine. But that was the beauty of it. Either way, he'd know. He'd know the woman who stood beside him in silence for 3 decades had spoken. He just hadn't heard her voice until now. And when I looked at myself in the mirror that night, I didn't see a woman seeking payback. I saw a woman who had nothing to prove. The revenge wasn't in rage. It was in restraint. Because poetic justice isn't about spectacle, it's about timing. And mine had just arrived. The ballroom glows with candlelight and self-congratulation. Men in tuxedos sip aged scotch. Women air kiss with perfectly painted smiles. And string instruments hum above the sound of legacy. This is Daniel Weston's night, his kingdom, his coronation into retirement. Curated, catered, choreographed. He moves through the room like a man on a throne, and I trail behind him, unseen but never unaware. They all know me, of course. They nod politely, compliment my dress, say things like, "You've always been such a graceful woman, Claire, but no one really sees me." Not yet. Daniel clinks his glass at the head table. A hush spreads like fog across the room. He smiles, all white teeth and polished charm, and begins his speech. 35 years ago, I started with nothing but a desk, a dream, and a damn good sense of timing. The audience laughs. I don't. I glance across the room at the far wall, where the staff is beginning to unveil the large, wrapped gift I sent anonymously. The canvas is still covered, its silk ribbon untouched. Soon, Daniel talks on, about sacrifice, perseverance, the market, leadership. He makes a few safe jokes, then gestures toward me. And of course, I couldn't have done any of this without my wife, Claire. She gave me stability when I needed it, space when I demanded it, and the kind of quiet loyalty that never asked for anything in return. Polite applause. My throat tightens. He smiles down at me, expecting a demure nod. I offer it, but it's not what he thinks it is. He continues, and because of her, I always had a reason to come home, even if I was too tired to talk. More applause. A few chuckles. Then he lifts his glass and says, Claire, I know words aren't really your thing, but I'd love for you to say a few, just to close the night. He offers the mic. The room turns. All eyes fall on me. I rise slowly. My heels barely make a sound on the floor. I take the microphone. My hand doesn't shake. Thank you, I say softly. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but sometimes silence grows too heavy not to break. The room stills. You could hear a pin drop over the clink of a glass being quietly set down. For years, I told myself my role was to support, to stay steady, to keep the engine running while someone else steered the ship. And I did that. Not because I was weak, but because I believed in partnership. I believed in us. My voice holds. Calm, even. But over time, something shifted. Not in me, in him. I gestured gently toward Daniel. You stopped seeing me. Somewhere along the climb, I became background noise to your monologue. And I accepted that. Until I didn't. A ripple of tension moves across the crowd. While you were chasing your dreams, I began to chase mine. Quietly. And now, they're real. Tangible. Protected. I pause. Then turn slightly to address the entire room. Many of you know Daniel's company headquarters. You walk by it daily. Some of you work in it. There's some nodding, confused but attentive. Starting next month, the building's main lobby will feature a permanent installation, a mural entitled Unseen. It's my work, my name, my vision. Daniel blinks. The room shifts. And this, I nod toward the staff now fully unveiling the large canvas at the side of the room, is called Departure. It was a gift. From me. To the man who once believed I had no voice. The cover drops. The painting stands in cold beauty. All steel blues, gold streaks, deep lines of movement and fracture. Elegant. Stark. A storm breaking open. Gasps ripple through the room. On the plaque, under the painting. To Daniel, for the legacy you thought you owned. With all my silence, Claire. He reads it. Twice. Then again. The blood drains from his face, but I'm not finished. I've filed copyright for every piece of art I've ever made, under my business, which, by the way, is not a hobby. It's a 6-figure studio with corporate clients, public commissions, and zero debt. Murmurs now. From colleagues, old friends, board members. And I've been advised to let you all know, I add calmly, that Weston Studios shares no legal affiliation with Daniel's company, nor with the Weston marital estate, as outlined by the LLC reclassification made official 3 months ago. Daniel opens his mouth, but nothing comes out. I look at him. Not in anger, not in pity, in clarity. And one more thing, I say, quieter now, leaning in slightly. Cassidy's lease, the one you co-signed, it's in a building I own through a shell trust. The rent just tripled. His face freezes, lips parting slightly, hands still. Silence. Total silence. And then, a low exhale from somewhere in the crowd. Someone whispers, "Damn." I hand the mic back to the MC, thank the audience for their kindness, and return to my seat. No tears, no gloating, just quiet power, restored. Daniel doesn't speak to me the rest of the night. He makes small talk, smiles for photos, but he never looks me in the eye again. He can't, because the one woman he thought would never leave his shadow just lit it on fire, in front of everyone who helped him cast it. And I didn't have to scream to do it. After the applause died, if you could call that stunned quiet applause, the air in the ballroom changed. It didn't happen all at once. It began at the edges of the room, with glances. Then low whispers. Then slow movements, like people realizing the performance had ended and they'd missed the twist until it slapped them across the face. Daniel stood still, wineglass in hand, staring at the plaque under the painting like it had personally betrayed him. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not shorter. Not older. Just hollow. Cassidy was the first to speak. She walked over, her heels clicking like little exclamation points on marble. She glanced at the plaque, then at him. Her voice was barely a whisper, but I heard it. "You didn't tell me she was that Claire." He didn't answer. His mouth opened, then closed again, like he was searching for a script that had finally run out of pages. People began approaching me, not him. An arts commissioner introduced herself and asked for a studio tour. One of the city officials Daniel had courted for years complimented my vision and said, "I never knew." Exactly. He never let them. But now? They couldn't unsee me. Daniel tried to salvage it, tried to lean into a joke. I heard him laugh nervously to a colleague and say, "You know Claire, always full of surprises." But the room didn't laugh with him, because they'd seen the surprise, and it wasn't funny. At one point, a journalist from the local business paper approached him, politely but directly. "Daniel, can you comment on your wife's installation at your company's headquarters? That's a fascinating development." He blinked. I wasn't aware of that until tonight." A pause. The journalist raised an eyebrow. "She secured the commission 3 weeks ago. It was in the council meeting notes." Daniel nodded stiffly, but said nothing. Later, I watched him try to corner the event coordinator, snapping under his breath about inappropriate gifts and how this was supposed to be his night. The coordinator shrugged. "It was your night, until it became hers." That was the first time he looked at me, really looked at me, the entire evening. His eyes weren't angry. They were lost, like a man waking up in someone else's house and not remembering how he got there. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I just met his gaze with the same stillness I had offered him 100 times over the years. The kind he mistook for weakness. The kind that now terrified him. He walked over eventually. Waited until most of the crowd had turned their attention back to drinks and dessert. He stood in front of me, hesitant, with that polite corporate smile he used on people he no longer respected. "Claire," he said softly, "that was unexpected." I nodded. "Was it? I just wish you'd told me that you were—" He gestured vaguely toward the mural. "Doing all of this." I tilted my head, just slightly. "Like the way you told me about Cassidy?" I asked. His smile faltered. "I never meant for that to get public," I finished, "or for it to exist at all." He exhaled through his nose. "You made your point." "I didn't come here to make a point," I said. "I came here to reclaim my voice, the one you joked about not existing." His jaw tightened, and then I said the line that finally cracked him. "You always said I never understood your work. Maybe you just never understood mine." He went silent. And for once, he couldn't spin it. Couldn't laugh it off, smooth it over, or change the subject. Because the room wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the woman he had spent decades keeping in the background. And now, she was the only one anyone wanted to talk to. He tried again, softer this time. "So, what happens now?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because not everything deserves a response. Some questions are better left in the silence they created. He stood there for another beat, searching my face for anything he could use to reclaim control. Anger, regret, softness. But there was none. Only peace. Earned. Unapologetic. Untouchable. I turned slightly, caught the attention of the gallery director from across the room, and excused myself with a quiet, "If you'll forgive me, I have people waiting." That line, said with perfect grace, hit harder than anything loud ever could. Because Daniel wasn't just being left behind. He was being left irrelevant. And that was the thing he never prepared for. No collapse, no grand scene. Just a soft, final closing of a chapter he thought he authored alone. But this story, this one was always mine. 2 days after the party, I sat in my studio with the windows open and a breeze rolling in over the oak trees. Morning light spilled across the hardwood floor, and the scent of linseed oil and lavender drifted through the room like an old friend. There was no noise, no demands, no deadlines. Only stillness. For the first time in decades, I felt like I could exhale without asking permission. I hadn't heard from Daniel since that night. No phone call, no letter, just quiet. The kind of silence that used to feel sharp. Now it felt like space, and I didn't fill it. There was nothing left to say. He'd returned to his empty condo, the one he once bought as a backup property for business travel. Cassidy moved out the week after the gala. I didn't ask why, but I imagined watching a man unravel in slow motion wasn't the future she pictured. He still had his title, his pension, his plaques on corporate walls. But none of that meant anything when the applause stopped echoing. He used to joke that I was too sentimental, said I held on to old things, handwritten cards, pressed flowers, stories that never happened. He wasn't wrong. I am sentimental, but I've learned that sentiment isn't weakness. It's awareness. Of beauty, of meaning, of the quiet chapters that speak louder than the loud ones. That's why I kept the envelope, cream-colored, hand-addressed, his handwriting, familiar even now. It arrived a week after the party. No return address, no sender, just a single page inside. Claire, I see now. You were never in my shadow. I was just too far behind to see your light. Daniel. I folded the letter and placed it inside my sketchbook, between 2 pages of blue ink and soft pastels. Not out of nostalgia. Not because I forgave him, but because I wanted to remember the truth of it all. Not just the pain, but the becoming. That's what this was, after all. Not revenge. Rebirth. I stood in the doorway of my new studio that afternoon. A renovated loft in the heart of the city. Sunlight touched every corner. My name was etched on the door in clean brass letters. Claire Weston, artist in residence. Clients came and went. My assistant buzzed from her desk with the ease of someone who believed in the work. And me? I painted. Not for applause. Not for survival. Not for him. For me. I painted what silence felt like. I painted what rebuilding tasted like. I painted the version of myself I almost lost, and the one who rose anyway. One evening, I walked by the lobby of his old headquarters. The mural had just been installed. Unseen, bold, aching, unapologetic. A woman in profile, eyes closed, spine straight, hair lifted by invisible wind. She wasn't weeping. She wasn't angry. She was becoming right there, in front of everyone who had once overlooked her. A young woman walked by and paused beside me. She looked at the mural, then at me. "She looks like she's finally done waiting," she said. I smiled. She is. We stood in silence a moment longer, both of us staring at the woman on the wall, the one who had waited in the background for too long. I walked away after that. Not from something, but toward something. There's power in the quiet exit. In knowing that the story no longer needs you to stay on the page, that the final sentence has already been written. With grace, with strength, and with ink no one else can smudge. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't slam doors. I simply turned the page. And for the first time in my life, it was written in my handwriting.